Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Cloud Gaming Report. I'm your host Zach, and I can actually say this week's episode because I did manage to record 2 episodes of this podcast in the last 2 weeks. That doesn't always happen as life gets in the way, but we did manage to do that, so that's some pretty exciting news. I also have a slight code, so sorry if I'm a little bit harder to understand than normal. I do apologize for that. So let's go ahead and dive into our first topic, which is the new games added to the GeForce Now platform in the past week. So starting with Deep Sky Derelicts, Farm Together, Lego Worlds, Ring of Elysium, and finally Soul Calibur 4. Moving on to our next topic, we have the news that Shadow has finished their CPU upgrades here in the US. So this was announced a while ago. It did take a little bit longer than I initially expected, but we do now have the new CPUs. And I did say CPUs because in France, they actually only upgraded to a single CPU. When they first announced the US upgrade, we were only expecting to get one CPU variant, but they did end up actually implementing 2 different CPUs here in the US. We don't know exactly why they did that. It might be due to availability of these CPUs. They are pretty costly CPUs, so I'm sure Intel doesn't make a ton of them. So that might have something to do with it, or it could be due to cost. We don't really know exactly at this point in time. What we do know is our old CPU was the E5 2620 running at 2.1 gigahertz, and each user had access to all 4 cores. Moving on from there, we have the Xeon E5 2667 running at 3.2 gigahertz, and all users had access to all 4 cores. This was the CPU that France upgraded to, and we were expecting to get here in the US. Now, with that said, every time I have launched my Shadow instance, and every time you launch your Shadow instance from the shutdown state, you could get put in a different instance. So with that said, I have got placed in the E5 2667 running at 3.2 gigahertz every time that I launch it to my Shadow. I don't know if you will have the same experience. I am in the West Coast data center, so maybe the West Coast has all 2667s. That's really up in the air. Maybe the East Coast has more of the other CPU, which I'm going to get to here in a second. We really don't know. I'm going to continue testing to see if I can get the other CPU to also do some benchmarks on that. I did run benchmarks on the old CPU before we upgraded. I actually did it as soon as the upgrade announcement was made, so I can do a video in the future. I didn't expect this video to be like a 4-month project, but by the time I get my upgrades, or by the time I actually run the benchmarks on the new upgrade and edit the video, it will be a pretty lengthy project. Not that it took me that much time, simply due to waiting on the upgrade to launch here in the US. So some pretty exciting news. The other CPU that we have in the US is the E5 2678 running at 2.5 gigahertz. And this is a 6-core CPU, but we will only actually be able to access 4 of those CPU cores for consistency's sake. So hopefully that eliminates any bugs of launching an instance from 4 CPU cores to 6 CPU cores and back and forth. It isn't clear at this point in time if a couple of those extra cores that aren't being actively utilized by our computer, if they might be able to take some of the overhead from encoding the frame to send to our local computers. Maybe that still might be a little bit more beneficial to have a couple extra cores that aren't actually being used by our gaming machines, or if those extra cores are kind of just being quote unquote wasted. The final topic for this week is a little bit of news from Microsoft's earnings call, where their CEO spoke a little bit about some of the future initiatives coming from Microsoft, which directly relate to their project xCloud. So just a little bit of snippets here that I want to cover real quick. So during the earnings call, he did mention, the CEO Nadella, he mentioned that the Gamepass is coming over to the PC. Now, this was already the case for certain games, such as first-party games directly developed by Microsoft. For instance, Sea of Thieves. I have my Game Pass on my Xbox. Assuming that I was signed into the same account on the PC, I was able to play those games for free on the PC because I had the Game Pass on the Xbox. So when he says that the Game Pass is coming to the PC, I have to imagine that they mean they're going to be expanding it beyond the select few first-party developed games to games that are offered from other providers. The games that were available on the Game Pass on the PC side of things had to be downloaded through the Microsoft Store. So I don't know if this also means that Microsoft is going to be making an initiative to push to get more games on the Microsoft Store. That'll be an interesting move for Microsoft. I know a lot of people don't really like the Microsoft Store, but it has become a pretty decent experience. There are, of course, some crap apps, but I think that's the case with any app store out there, really. You can get on Valve and get on the Steam, of course, and find crappy games there too. So it's kind of just a way of life, or a fact of life, I guess. Not really a way of life, but a fact of life that you're going to have crappy apps on any app platform out there, really. But it has improved over time, and this will be kind of interesting to see if they continue to push it and we start to see more and more games available on the Microsoft Store. Moving on from there, he also talked a little bit about how they have kind of a unique advantage when it comes to streaming technology, directly in relation to their project xCloud. So they have both the community side of things with their Xbox. They have the Xbox Live platform. So they already have an established community that's been going on for quite some time. So this is kind of similar to other offerings out there that are going for cloud gaming, such as PlayStation Now and GeForce Now, where they already have communities. NVIDIA, of course, has their massive, GeForce community, and PlayStation, of course, has all the PlayStations dating back to the PlayStation 1. So they already have established communities. They also have a unique approach where they have cloud expertise and power. This is also true for other cloud gaming initiatives out there, such as Google's Project Stream, where Google has their Google data center. The name slips my mind right now. It's not uniquely named, if I remember correctly. Microsoft's, of course, is called Azure, so kind of sticks in my mind a little bit better because it kind of has a unique name. But anyways, so what he was saying there is they have kind of that unique advantage where they have both the cloud expertise and the cloud power, and they do, in fact, they have data centers all across the US. So once they decide to roll out the service, they could very easily make it a worldwide service very quickly. So very cool news there. They already don't have to build out data centers. They already have those data centers. They just needed to throw some new hardware in there because xCloud will be using special hardware. And they have a community. They have Xbox Live. They've been building that. They have been trying to get that on the PC a couple of times. They had the Xbox Live on PC initiative a while ago. That didn't really pan out, but they do have an existing community. So it'll be interesting to see if they are able to combine those two distinct parts of what makes gaming great to make a very strong cloud gaming initiative here in the very near future. We'll hopefully be able to get testing here in 2019. Hopefully I'll be able to be one of those guys testing and let you guys know how the service is panning out compared to other offerings out there on the market. So that's all the topics for this week's episode. Of course, this was a pretty short podcast, but we did have some news I wanted to share with you guys, particularly the CPU upgrades have now finished for Shadow. That's definitely interesting news. And hopefully we see some improvements in our gameplay, and a little bit extra frames would never hurt. So thanks for listening or watching to this week's episode of the Cloud Gaming Report. I do appreciate your support. Make sure you subscribe, follow, like, love, whatever the action is on your podcast app, of course, or on YouTube, of course. I do greatly appreciate all your guys' support. So thanks for watching or listening once again, guys. And until next time, Zach.